Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom. This is Yaakazaki Yahoo, and I start this broadcast as I would start any broadcast by first of all giving all praise, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahuwah, Bahashem, Yahushua Hamashiach, and to the 12 tribes of Israel who are scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say shalom, Wabarukim, that is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait to the day that the Most High brings us back together and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation, under the Most High power, under one covenant. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
I'm joined this afternoon by my most esteemed Ak Akinanaya. Shabbat Shalom, Aki.
Hey, Shabbat Shalom, Aki. Shabbat Shalom, Yasharal. All praises to the Most High for allowing us yet another set apart Yom.
Hallelujah. Yes, indeed. It is another Sabbath day, another Sabbath Yom, and praises to the Father for another opportunity to rest and not be burdened with work and other burdens that burden us on a day in and day out base.
Mm-hmm.
So praise to the Father for that. We're going to get into a video review uh, as we've been reviewing some of these videos and they've been very much edifying to us and to our viewers. And we're going to get into another. I'm taking just a minute to share to the various platforms real quick. And I'll have this completed in just a brief moment. And then we'll get to the video. This video highlights the history that the Arab slave trade meant or put on our people, and it was definitely a hard way to go. Uh, Lots of rough situations during the time of the Arab slave trade. So, uh, all right, I think that's it. And all right, here we go. Let's get to the video, and here we go.
The 25th of March was, as usual, commemorated as the day Britain officially abolished its slave trade in 1807. But how many recall that Arab slavers were the first and last in modern times to ship millions of Africans out of the continent as slaves? The Arab history of anti-black racism predates European anti-black racism by several centuries. The early Islamic Empire exhibited all the characteristics of anti-black racism, and blacks suffered the lowest form of bondage. Europeans took photographs of chained black African slaves in Arab slave trading vessels on the east coast of Africa in the 1880s. Slavery persisted openly in Saudi Arabia and other Muslim countries in the latter half of the 20th century, 100 years after slavery was abolished in the United States. As late as the 1960s, African Muslims still sold slaves when they arrived on pilgrimages as a way to finance their pilgrimages. Arab nations lagged far behind the rest of the world in abolishing slavery. Saudi Arabia and Yemen in 1962, United Arab Emirates in 1963, Oman in 1970. However, unlike the rest of the Arab nations, hereditary racial slavery persists in Mauritania, despite multiple official attempts to abolish it. In 1981, by presidential decree, Mauritania became the last country in the world to abolish slavery, but no criminal laws were passed to enforce the ban. Under international pressure in 2007, the Mauritanian government passed a law allowing slaveholders to be persecuted. However, that law has rarely been enforced. Far more anti-slavery human rights activists have been prosecuted than the handful of Mauritanian white masters. In addition, slavers are offered compensation for freeing the enslaved, while the victims of the brutality are offered nothing. In 2015, under international and some domestic mobilization pressure, the Mauritanian government created 3 special courts to prosecute slavery, but so far they have only tried very few cases. However, that's just not all about this oddly unique sect of slavers. The Arab slavers, at some point in history driven outrageously by their odd ambition for economic power and human control, had their African male captives subjected to unimaginable suffering and exploitation. Castration. Yes, you heard correctly. Now, it is of utmost importance to note that what you are about to hear might seem like comparing which, between two evils, is better. It does not detract from the fact that the trade in human beings was unspeakably hideous. In the Americas, slaves were allowed to marry, though their children could be sold off like puppies right before their eyes. But what happened to the blacks enslaved by the Arabs? Arabs castrated African slaves. Thus, they could not reproduce their kinds to multiply and replenish the earth. Welcome to yet another video segment. In this video, we are taking a dive at one of the darkest chapters in the human history, marked by its profound brutality and stomach-twisting inhumanity, the Arab slave trade and the castration of their male captives during this dark era. Before we get right into this head-spinning narrative, don't forget to like this video as a way of acknowledging our efforts, share with family and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and subscribe to keep the channel growing. Your support means a lot.
Wow. So just to start 3 minutes into the video here, they're already telling us that during the Arab slave trade, that the so-called blacks or Negroes were subjected to castration. Castration, which is why you don't see oodles of black people in these places, because they were not able to reproduce themselves. They were castrated, which for those who don't know means that they surgically removed their male parts, and they were left without it. And so with that happening, of course, there's no reproduction. I don't even know how they went to the bathroom. But yeah, wow, that is
And I want to say it's the removal of the testicles. So you still have your penis shaft, but I'm not sure, but because you're right, like how would one urinate, unless you had your penis shaft, but uh, we saw this done to some of our ancestors in captivity in Babylon, probably Persia as well. Uh, but you'll see darker faces, and you'll look at them, and you can kind of see the melanin in them. But this is very telling. So these melanated people that we see over there probably have a mother that is of melanated descent,
mm,
and probably have a father that is of Arab descent,
mm,
or I'm saying Arab, which
mm,
just means mixed people, but
right,
these Arabs are really from Turkey.
yeah,
These are Turks,
yeah,
and the original Arabs were black people, or so-called black people.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, we've read in the book of Better Sheep, the beginning, Yaktan, his what was it, 15 sons he had,
Uh-huh.
and they were considered Arabs. Of course, probably the most notorious Arabs were the Ishmaelites, the the Edomites, and the all the brothers of Ishmael, the children of Keturah, uh,
Midianites.
Midianites. Yeah, the
Yeah, used interchangeably oftentimes with Ishmaelites.
Ishmael, indeed, yes, indeed. I mean, various other tribes. Uh, I think it was Yaktan that we looked at. It says progenitor of various Arab Arab tribes. I think he said.
Yeah, I want to say that was Bereshit 10.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, yes, indeed. So, but yeah, yeah. So there's those people in that area that would come from, you know, in the scriptures. If we go to Book of Judges, it refers to them as the children of the East. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and same thing in ironically, that brings back a different memory, because in Genesis 25, it talks about Abraham and when he had his children with Keturah and how he dealt with them. He sent them east to the east country. So the children of the east actually came from Abraham. So
Mm-hmm.
like we had the same father, the same grandfather, and you know. So, but let's continue here.
To us, the castration of male captives during the Arab slave trade would be a forever lasting, devastating experience for the individuals who were subjected to this depraved, inhuman practice and their families. In his book Slaves and Slavery, published in 1998, the British writer Duncan Clark defines slavery as the reduction of fellow human beings to the legal status of chattels, allowing them to be bought and sold as goods. This, in essence, is what both the Arabs and Europeans did to Africans, to justify the shipping of millions of Africans as slaves to faraway lands in Asia, in particular the Middle East, and the Americas. The African slave trade, surely one of the most tragic and disturbing episodes in the history of mankind, Clark uncovers in his book, had its origins in the intervention of forces from the civilizations that developed in the regions of the Mediterranean Sea, today's Europe and the Middle East, into the arena of the more fragmented civilizations of sub-Saharan Africa. Africa became a source of slaves for the cultures of the Mediterranean world many centuries before the discovery of the Americas, but it was that discovery and the resulting shift in focus towards the Atlantic that prompted the culminating explosive growth in slavery with such tragic effect. Slavery was, in fact, a central feature of life in the Mediterranean world, especially in Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, Greece, Imperial Rome, and the Islamic societies of the Middle East and North Africa. The most important source of slaves in medieval Europe, Clark's research shows, was the coast of Bosnia on the eastern shores of the Adriatic Sea. The word slave and its cognates in most modern European languages is itself derived from Sclavis's meaning Slav, the ethnic name for the inhabitants of this region. For various reasons, including the harshness of the terrain and endemic warfare among local clans, Bosnia proved the most convenient and long-lasting of these slave-supplying regions. Whichever clan gained a temporary upper hand was always willing to sell its captured rivals in exchange for the goods of the Mediterranean world in the markets of the ancient Romanized city of Ragusa.
Bosnia. I don't know much about that particular place, but I'm gonna have to look into that because I'm pretty sure that these people that they were trading happen to be
You're
our people.
fed.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you think so?
Well, yeah, Bosnia was in the Baltic region. Let me go up here on my map real quick. I want to say the Caspian Sea, but you remember that there was maybe back in shortly before you joined the military, there was
Mm-hmm.
a bombing going on over in Bosnia. Uh,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
so this was the Baltic region. Uh, these would have been uh Yefet.
But these were the black people there. So
Mm,
Slavic is what they called it, with their name.
I don't think that they were melanated people.
Okay. Uh,
Yeah, these Slavic, even today, these Slavic people still exist, and they're Yefet.
okay. Kind.
Yeah.
Okay. It's,
And what it was, they were being, they were at war in that area.
mm,
So the people who conquered them would use them as slaves and commodity to gain resources from the Mediterranean region. And I'm not able to find it on my map, but I know the area that it's at. Like I said, there was a bombing that was going on there in 1998, and even so more recent times as well. But let's see. Yeah, well, I'll have to look at that pull it up on the map at some point. But
yeah. We'll take a look at that once we get there. Let's move forward into this.
if
Uh,
con,
yeah, this is President uh, the Broker the Brokovikin the Brokovikin. I think you'll say. Let's continue here.
and is present-day Dubrovnik. From there, Slavs were shipped as slaves by Venetian merchants to supply new markets in the Islamic world. Thus, for the Islamic world, Clark further reveals, Slavs provided the major source of slaves in the 250 or so years between the defeat at the Battle of Poitiers in AD 732 that forced the consolidation of their dramatic conquests across North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula, cutting back the flow of war captives, and the expansion of the import of black Africans across the Sahara from around AD 1000. The number of people enslaved by Muslims has been a hotly debated topic, especially when the millions of Africans forced from their homelands are considered. With full control of a great part of Africa, the Arabs began to capture young boys and girls and took them to Egypt, where they were sold into slavery within Africa, or taken across the Indian Ocean to Indonesia, China, Southwest Asia, and India. By the 10th century, the demand for slaves from Africa to work as plantation hands, sex slaves, domestic maids, and slave warriors had increased greatly, so much so that an estimated number of 5,000 slaves were shipped out of Africa a year. The historian Paul Lovejoy estimates that some 9.85 million Africans were shipped out as slaves to Arabia, and in small numbers to the Indian subcontinent. Lovejoy breaks his figures down as follows. Between AD 650 and 1600, an average of 5,000 Africans were shipped out per annum by the Arabs. This makes a rough total of 7.25 million. Then, between 1600 and 1800, another 1.4 million Africans were shipped out by the Arabs. The 19th century represented the highest point of the Arabian trade, as 12,000 Africans were vehemently shipped out per annum. The total figure for the 19th century alone was 1.2 million slaves to Arabia. Some other historians estimate altogether that between AD 650 and 1900, 10 million to 20 million people were enslaved by Arab slave traders. Others believe that over 20 million enslaved Africans alone had been delivered through the trans-Saharan route alone to the Islamic world. Dr. John Alambella Azuma estimates in his 2001 book, The Legacy of Arab Islam in Africa, that over 80 million more black people died over that route. The Arab slave trade was so intense, bloody, merciless to say the least. The cruelty on African captives by the Arabs was beyond telling. Similar to the transatlantic slave trade, captured slaves were beaten to be weakened and chained together. However, captured victims in the sub-Saharan slave trade had to endure several weeks of walking through the desert, carrying loads for their new masters from West or East Africa, to where they were eventually sold in the slave markets: Cairo, Baghdad, Istanbul, Mecca, and other centers. These slaves played various roles in the economy of the Muslim world. They were used as servants, harem keepers, laborers in fields, mines, and hydraulic yards, and as cannon fodder in armies. In several of his detailed books about the slave trade, British explorer Henry Hamilton Johnston explains how several slaves died in the desert, while others who fell sick or were badly bruised and could not make it were brutally killed by their masters. David Livingstone, the British missionary, traveler, and explorer, was so upset by the way the Arabs treated their African slaves that he wrote back home in the year 1870. These were his words: "In less than I take to talk about it, these unfortunate creatures, 84 of them, wended their way into the village where we were. Some of them, the eldest, were women from 20 to 22 years of age, and there were youths from 18 to 19 years. But the large majority was made up of boys and girls from 7 years to 14 or 15 years of age. A more terrible scene than these men, women, and children I do not think I ever came across. To say that they were emaciated would not give you an idea of what human beings can undergo under certain circumstances. Each of them had his neck in a large forked stick weighing from 30 to 40 pounds and 5 or 6 feet long, cut with a fork at the end of it where the branches of a tree spread out. The women were tethered with bark thongs, which are of all things the most cruel to be tied with. Of course, the bark thongs are soft and supple when first stripped off the trees, but a few hours in the sun would make them about as hard as the iron round packing cases. The little children were fastened by thongs to their mothers. As we passed along the path through which these slaves had traveled, I was shown a spot in the bushes where a poor woman the day before, unable to keep up with the march and most likely to hinder it, was cut down by the axe of one of these slave drivers. We went on further and were shown a place where a child lay. It had been recently born, and its mother was unable to carry it from debility and exhaustion. So the slave trader had taken this little infant by its feet and dashed its brains out against one of the trees and thrown it in there. Such was the brutality meted out to the Africans by the Arabs. Looking at all this in a very factly honest manner, the totality of the unthinkable, horrid practices beset it upon a certain group of people.
Well, my gracious. You know, of course, we recently read Psalms, and in Psalms there's a script that says, uh, "Happy, happy are the children of Israel to who taketh talking about Edom, who are
Mm-hmm.
Arabs. Happy are they that take your little ones and dash them against the stones." And that's what they were doing to our people. So this one is in this instance, it was a tree. Um, wow, newborn baby, and just
And I believe it might be Psalm 146. It's towards the end because I
yeah,
remember us reading that.
that last I think it was last week.
Yeah, Khan.
It was last week when we read it. So yeah, that's wow, that's cold. So I will put his spirit on us to get in that mode. It won't be coming up with some new stuff. It'll be putting things back to giving them back what they didn't earn, what they
Hmm.
gave to us. It'll be a recompense. So
Yeah, and I it's just we know that here in this hemisphere, we were given Christianity,
hmm
and it was brutal as well, and we kind of look at our brothers and sisters that are in the church now kind of funny, like why would you want to be a part of the same religion as your oppressor?
right.
But we've got quite a number of our people that are in Islam now,
Mhm.
and we're hearing about this brutality.
Right.
You know, how could you ever be a part of this with these people, knowing what they've done to your people?
Right.
Uh,
Well,
oh, go
definitely.
ahead.
I was gonna say definitely. I think it's ignorance. Just not knowing what's really going on, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, they is this history made known? Who knows? I mean, that's this fellow wrote about it in his book, and this brother is going over it on this video. Um, I mean, yeah, it's a hard way to go. It's a hard thing to deal with. Like your mother had you trekking through the desert, and this guy comes and picks you up and dashes you against a tree, and what's and nothing to protect the newborn baby except the mother or the father. So somebody grab him by the leg and throw him against the tree. That baby is not going to be anymore. There's no coming back from that. So that's a that's a rough situation. But yeah, that recompense is coming according to what the prophets have said. So
Mm-hmm.
do you have something else?
Well, I was gonna say that you know, in the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal,
Mm,
at the time that the Spanish and Portuguese king had made decrees for the Yahudim to either stop practicing uh, Judaism
mm,
and stop keeping the Sabbath, they were forced to convert to Catholicism. So, like around the same time that that was going on in that part of the world, in Africa, our people were being forced to convert to Islam or die.
right.
So. A lot of them fled further south. Uh, you know, yeah, these this northern region. They spoke about this Morocco still having slavery going on up until the 1980s. it still goes on today in Morocco as well as Libya, and what is the name of these people? The Tuaregs. The Tuaregs, which are the people of some of the people of North Africa. Different historians will say that they are the modern day Canaanites today, but amongst them there are Hebrew people. I forget exactly what name they are. They go by there, but they are in a sub. They're in a position of servitude to these people, and we would call it slavery.
Right.
Still going on today. You know.
Con. Yeah, and that's prevalent still in like Arabia and probably some of these other nations of these Arab nations. Um, I don't know what's going on in Iran, but I'm pretty sure they got people doing servitude. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? Like they're not just you know building their own stuff out there. All the stuff that's built, I'm sure they're not hiring contractors. They probably using people who are so-called slaves, which majority of those will probably be our people. So let's continue.
Yeah. So I'm. Well, yeah. Let's just continue. I was getting ready to say something crazy.
All right, I got you.
Yeah.
We'll get to the final thoughts there on that.
Yeah. Con.
Yeah, you're right.
Historians agree that it is a mistake to equate the bare survival of Africa with cultural or social or economic stagnation, for the slave trade visited such panoply of tragically interconnected disasters into the lives of every African for centuries, so that they have worked their way into the very racial memory of the continent and its people, particularly females, that only with time and kindness can it be expunged from the psyche of Africa. The Arabs' treatment of black Africans can aptly be termed an African genocide. Arabs killed more Africans in transit, especially when crossing the Sahara Desert, than Europeans and Americans combined, and over more centuries, both before and after the years of the Atlantic slave trade. Arab Muslims began extracting millions of black African slaves centuries before Christian nations did. Arab slave traders removed slaves from Africa for about 13 centuries, compared to the 3 centuries of the Atlantic slave trade. African slaves transported by Arabs across the Sahara Desert died more often than slaves making the middle passage to the New World by ship. Slaves invariably died within 5 years if they worked in the Ottoman Empire's Sahara salt mines. Black Africans did not enjoy immunity to many of the diseases found in the Arab world, which also resulted in high death rates. In West Africa, the Arab slave trade encompassed a vast region from the Niger Valley to the Gulf of Guinea. This traffic followed the trans-Saharan roads. The crossing could last up to 3 months with a high mortality rate due to the dire conditions of the trip. Here is the testimony of the German explorer Gustav Nachtigal. The poor children of the black countries seemed to meet death here, at the last stage of a long, hopeless, and painful journey. The long journey accomplished with insufficient food and scarce water. The contrast between the rich natural resources and the humid atmosphere of their homeland, and the dry and anemic air of the desert, the fatigue and the privations imposed by their masters and by the circumstances in which they find themselves. All this has gradually ruined their young strengths. The memory of their homeland that has disappeared along the way, their fear of an unknown future, the endless journey under the blows, hunger, thirst, and deadly exhaustion have paralyzed their last faculties of resistance. If the poor creatures lack strength to get up and walk again, they are simply abandoned, and their minds slowly fade under the destructive effect of the rays of the sun, hunger, and thirst. According to the work of some historians, the Arab slave trade has affected more than 17 million people. In the Saharan region alone, more than 9 million African captives were deported and 2 million died on the roads. This despicable phenomenon was legitimized by Islam, as Christianity would later condone the transatlantic slave trade. For example, the Tunisian Arab historian Ibn Khaldun, from 1332 to 1406, wrote that the only peoples to accept slavery are the Negroes because of their lower degree of humanity, their place being closer to the animal stage. Another one, the Algerian Arab theologian Ahmed al-Wancharisi, from 1430/1431 to 1508, offered legal and religious recommendations. This, he said, I have been asked about slaves from the land of Abyssinia who profess monotheism and accept the rules of the holy law. Is it legal or not to buy and sell them? If their conversion to Islam comes after the establishment of a property right on these slaves, then Islam does not demand liberation because slavery was caused by unbelief. The state of servitude persists after the disappearance of unbelief because of its existence in the past. The Arab slave trade was characterized by appalling violence, rape, and worst of all, castration of black male slaves. While African women and girls were targeted, captured, and deported by Arab slavers for use as sex slaves, the male captives were, on the other hand, pitilessly castrated to prevent them from reproducing and becoming a stock. Castration of male slaves became a habit among slave traders due to the fact that they were in higher demand, stronger, noted to work faster and more efficiently, and were not a threat to slave masters and owners who feared that their wives, concubines, and female slaves would have affairs with them.
Yeah, like they took everything.
Mm-hmm.
But dang.
You know, it's a tricky situation, and
Yeah.
the reason I say that is because you and I, we watch these atrocities,
Mm-hmm.
and we want to say let's do away with slavery. But is
Mm-hmm.
that what the scripture says?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm not. I think it's terrible, and it hurts my heart to hear about these things happening to our people.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that the scripture says that in the end, those who possessed us,
Mm-hmm.
we will possess them.
Right.
Gonna sell some of them to the Sabians.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not gonna get on here and say like let's just do away with all of it, because like that's not what the script says.
Nah.
I'm gonna follow these scripts.
Right.
Now I can't see myself. It's just not in my heart to like want to do a person the way that these people are doing people.
Right.
I can't say that I would ever want to cast. I would maybe want to castrate a man like if he had raped, a sister.
Mm-hmm.
If this was a man from another nation that had raped an Israelite, I could maybe see castrating them then.
Yeah.
Um, Under that circumstance. Uh, yeah, it's the Father has put different things in different people's spirit, and that's not something that He's put into me, like to be cold and malice like that, under normal circumstances. Uh, what
Yeah.
you have, I?
See, the Torah tell us that if a man rape a woman, he'd be put to death. You know,
Mm-hmm.
where it talks about it in talks about if she in the city and she don't cry out, you know what
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying, and then she is not raped. I mean, of course, it's not a rape situation, but if she's in the country, then both of them would be put to death in the city. But if it was in a country, like in the outer area,
When
then
nobody could hear.
right, then only the man would be put to death. Because if she
Mm-hmm.
did cry out, then there's nobody there. So, uh, but so she can't be like, oh, get caught up with this man and be like, oh, he raped me. Like, no, we're not going for that. No, that ain't gonna happen. So, uh, but yeah, yeah. Let's finish this on up. That's hard to look at. That's hard to imagine.
Okay. And I honestly thought that it was reversed. I thought that the chattel slavery that was here, I'd always been told that the chattel slavery here was worse than how it was over in with the Arab slave trade. I'd been told that the Arabs looked at the slavery here as being harsh because they looked at uh the slaves as money.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't understand why they were being worked so hard. Uh and we'll get there. We'll get there when we close out.
Okay, okay, okay.
Yeah.
To work faster and more efficiently, and were not a threat to slave masters and owners who feared that their wives, concubines, and female slaves would have affairs with them. The suffering inflicted on the victims of castration was profound, encompassing physical and psychological trauma. Castration was done to boys between the ages of 9 and 12, as it was believed that they survived the process more than an adult or adolescent. Although very many did not survive the process, as they often died during or after the harrowing operation. Whites died more, so slavers concentrated more on blacks. This was the darkest chapter in history that highlights the extent to which humans were dehumanized and exploited for gain. Here's a more detailed insight into this practice. 1. Economic factors. One of the primary reasons for castrating male captives was economic. The exporting countries had good economic incentives to castrate male slaves before they were shipped off. In the medieval slaving industry that was designed for exporting Slavic prisoners of war to the Arab world, castrating the slaves was an integral part of the process. Castration was then performed in the famous castration houses in Venice. Eunuchs, or castrated male slaves, were highly sought after due to their perceived trustworthiness and reliability. Eunuchs were considered valuable commodities in Arab societies, thus fetching much higher prices in slave markets compared to non-castrated slaves. Their lack of reproductive capability meant that they could serve in positions of trust and authority without posing a threat to the owner's hereditary wealth and power. Eunuchs were often employed in sensitive positions such as harem guards, administrative posts, and as servants in elite households. They served in influential positions in the Abbasid Caliphate's administration, with some even rising to the rank of vizier. The economic incentives gained by slave traders from exporting black eunuchs to the Arab nations encouraged the practice of castration. In some cases, such as the Zanj Rebellion in the 9th century Iraq, castrated slaves were sought after to work in dangerous and demanding environments like salt mines. This practice had persisted for centuries in the Arab slave trade. As late as 1903, there were still 194 African eunuchs in service to the Ottoman ruling family. 2. Control and domination. Castration was employed by Arab slavers as a means of exerting control and dominance over their male captives. By removing their ability to procreate, the slavers aimed to eliminate any potential threats of rebellion or the establishment of rival lineages. Additionally, castration was intended to ensure that these slaves would remain solely devoted to their master's demands, without the distractions of family or personal attachments. 3. Social dislocation. Enslaved males who were castrated were forcibly removed from their communities and families. This social dislocation had far-reaching consequences as it disrupted the social fabric of African societies and led to imbalanced gender ratios. In regions where castration was prevalent, such as East Africa and the Sudan, entire villages were affected as young men were captured and subjected to this brutal practice. Many eunuchs who served in the harem of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul remained in servitude for life, isolated from their African roots. Their roles as loyal servants or guards sometimes meant they were isolated from their own cultural backgrounds and communities for life. Young boys were captured and castrated so that when they grew up, they could serve as eunuchs in harems. This slave ship was photographed in 1896. This large group of young boys may have been destined for castration to serve as eunuchs. The slaves in the photograph were headed to a Muslim country well after the American Civil War. In fact, slavery in the United States was a good bit more humane than slavery in the Arab world. It was bloody for Africans, bloody beyond words. In some cases, African societies would engage in castration as a preemptive measure to protect their youth from being captured and castrated by Arab slave traders. This reflects the deep fear and trauma associated with this practice. 4. Psychological and physical trauma. Castration was itself a traumatic experience, both physically and psychologically, for those subjected to it. The surgery itself was often performed without anesthesia under crude and unhygienic conditions, leading to excruciating pain and a high risk of infection. Many African boys did not survive their castration surgery. 6 out of every 10 people who were mutilated died from their wounds in castration centers. This is a prime reason why there are not many communities of blacks living in the non-African Muslim world today, despite the millions of black African slaves who were sold into the Muslim world. Castration led to hormonal imbalances on survivors, affecting the physical development and health of victims. Without testosterone, eunuchs often suffered from various health issues such as decreased muscle mass, fatigue, obesity, osteoporosis, and a lack of secondary sexual characteristics. 5. Cultural and religious beliefs. Some societies believed that castrated individuals were spiritually purer and more suitable for certain religious duties. For instance, in some Islamic societies, eunuchs were considered more appropriate for guarding holy sites. The guardianship of the Holy Kaaba in Mecca included the use of African eunuchs. Some men were castrated to be eunuchs in domestic service, and the practice of neutering male slaves was not limited to only black males. The Khalifa in Baghdad at the beginning of the 10th century had 7,000 black eunuchs and 4,000 white eunuchs in his palace, writes author Ronald Siegel in his 2002 book Islam's Black Slaves, The Other Black Diaspora. In the Arab world, demand for castrated slaves was so high that even with the appalling death rate from the procedure, it was still profitable, which explains why there is no large African diaspora community in Arab countries. Castrated men don't father children. The Arab slave trade had a tragic impact on the evolution of African societies. Some areas were completely devastated and depopulated. Welsh explorer Henry Morton Stanley, from 1841 to 1904, was a horrified witness of this traffic. He wrote that after the depredations of the Arab traffickers, the black blood flows toward the north. The equator smells corpses. As one commentator puts it, could it be true that the corrosive effects of 4 centuries of commerce in humans, with its temptation, its inbuilt opportunism, its reduction of humans to a cash value, its cycles of revenge, and its inevitable physical brutality, have built lasting flaws into the African pattern of thought and action? The United Nations has made March 23 the International Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade, and UNESCO has made August 23 the International Day for the Remembrance of the Slave Trade and its abolition. When will there be an international day to commemorate the victims of the Arab Muslim slave trade? When will an international research program address this subject? When will a project be implemented to identify, restore, and publicize the sites and monuments linked to this Arab trade, like the existing projects concerning the transatlantic trade? When will educational material be produced and cultural and artistic programs conducted to raise awareness of this criminal activity? When will a museum on the Arab Muslim slave trade be established? This brings us to the end of this video segment. And did you happen to learn a thing or two?
Wow, that is heartbreaking. Uh, whew. I mean, just to think that someone would feel justified in castrating another person and keeping them around. I think if I was, man, I don't know. I don't even know. I wouldn't even be the same person. You wouldn't be the same person if you was castrated.
Gone.
'Cause you wouldn't have the things that you have now. Like you wouldn't be like, would I even think of myself as a man?
And con and at that point, would I have a fear of death?
Sure, right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Would I have a fear? Would I be so afraid, like not to want to take the sword to who castrated me?
Right.
Fear being a reason like not to do it. I don't think so. I think like you said, I would feel like less of a man. I probably wouldn't care about too much.
Nah, I wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't be working in no post that you gonna put me at. Like, so that's why you put me. That's why you castrated me for this, so I can do this. Man, I'm not doing this. Give me one of them swords though. Let me get my hand on the sword.
Hell,
Oh my gracious, that's horrible. That is horrible to think that there are no, you know, populations and no diaspora there, and this is the reason why, because they was castrating people.
kind
Like,
of, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
that's just horrible to think of. Go ahead,
You know, you don't hear about Abraham castrating any of his servants. Uh, his servants were increased by just being around him.
right?
Likewise, European accounts of because slavery was going on in West Africa as well.
Mhm.
But you don't hear the European accounts of slavery being anywhere near of what it was in the transatlantic slave trade and the Arab slave trade. Oftentimes, the Europeans weren't able to distinguish between who was a slave and who was free, because oftentimes these slaves, these people in bondage in West Africa were treated on another level, higher than a regular citizen.
Right.
You know,
Right.
but like you said, that recompense is gonna be real, and I think we can add the Arabs to that list as well. The Arabs, the Ottomans,
Yeah.
anybody participating in the oppression of the Most High's people,
Correct.
is gonna pay for it.
Yeah. They're gonna pay. They're gonna pay dearly. I mean, I didn't have a clue that that was what was going on, and you would think when you hear something like that it would be very few. It would be very, only if you do this, then this will happen. But apparently, it was a lot more than that, and that's why you don't have any diaspora. Can you imagine if they brought everybody off the ship and started castrating people? Like
Hmm.
they would run out. I mean, that's crazy. That's
I used to work with a guy that was from Yemen.
mm,
Uh, he was biracial. You could tell that he was had some Arab blood in him, or Saudi blood in him. But you could also see the African in him as well. His mother was at one point a slave in Yemen, and he used to talk about how his brothers who were, they weren't mixed. They weren't mixed like how he was, and how he said how they used to mistreat him. Said he had to fight for everything, and at some point, he got away from there and came over here in America, and was studying to become a psychologist.
mm,
But you don't see a lot of melanated men, so-called black men, like over in that area.
right.
If you do, it's recent. Uh, and this is why. This is why.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. That's unreal. Unreal. Yeah. So yeah. Well, I hope that I wouldn't certainly wouldn't say edifying, but it definitely put some information into your mind to see this video and to understand what was happened there. Um, he said, what is that? 13 centuries.
Hmm.
That
13 centuries versus the 300 from
right,
the European nations. I'd like to go back and take a look at that, but uh, because I believe that a lot of that with the Arabs, it was blacks enslaving blacks, because the original Arabs were people of color. Then you had the Ottomans that came in, and also taking into account that these people mixed with the Greeks and the Romans as well,
right,
and got that skin tone that they have today.
right. Exactly, exactly. So yeah, yeah. Wow. It's a harsh reality, but it's a reality. Like you think you got it bad, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not. I certainly wouldn't applaud the transatlantic slave trade, but in comparison to what we just saw, wow, starkly different.
Hmm.
Starkly different. To think that I had an ancestor on the slave ship that came over here, and they got him off the slave ship, and he had a child who had a child who had a child who had a child who had a child, and would have been my grandfather, my father's father, and my father, and then me. You
Hmm.
know, that didn't exist here. That mm, that wasn't happening. So there is no diaspora there. There is no, uh, no seed of the enslaved people. So that's whew,
Man, and what they say, 80 million perished.
yeah,
I mean, that's more than perished over here in this hemisphere, man.
yeah. Well, uh, thinking it was like I thought it was like 100 million over here.
That perished.
Yeah,
Okay, I may be wrong, but yeah, 80 million. That seemed high. So, but it's a loss of life. None the least.
yeah, because I believe over here they killed 70 million Native Americans.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? Just the Native Americans, just the ones that was here when they got here. They killed 70 million of them. I believe is that number. And then they say 100,000 or 100 million so-called black people. Uh, where those numbers come from, I'm not for certain, but I've heard it. I've heard it stated in that manner before. So yeah, yeah, that's a harsh reality to think about. Like by castrating somebody, you literally are wiping away their uh, existence. Like that's it. That I can't go forward. Like wow, that is unreal. That is so unreal. And then of course we got the Torah. The Torah says he's that is wounded in his uh, private member or having his cut off shall not enter into the congregation.
You can't.
So all of these people who were subject to this treatment, I mean, wow. Maybe that's why they, on this side, they on the next side, they'll get their stuff back. I hope, most high willing. But man, that's a hard, that's a hard thing. Make you want to, I don't even know. I'm gonna end there before I say something to get us kicked out, kicked off of YouTube.
That's what I was. I had to catch myself earlier. I was
Right,
getting ready to say something crazy.
right. My gracious, I think this is the worst one yet. And people probably like, why y'all watch these stuff? Like, not putting your head in the sand is not gonna stop it. You know what I'm saying? Not knowing about it is not gonna fix it. That's the reality that exists
Mm-hmm.
and that existed then and exists now. Whether you know it or don't know it, it's still there. So
Con.
ignoring it is not going to resolve it.
Right. And then also we know that the calamity is to come on the whole earth. And people might, feel like why? Let's look back to some of the things that have been done and some of the things that are continuing to be done. That's why.
Indeed, indeed. Yes, indeed. So the Messiah returns and starts handing out recompenses. Don't be surprised. Don't be put off and think that he just mean or he's being cruel. No, no, because he's all that's happened. He's set up and watched,
Mm-hmm.
and the Most High told him to sit you at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. And so when that time comes, we read in the script, Revelation, about these people being treated as grapes. And it's a reason for that. It's a reason for that. And this is one of those reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those places that he just mentioned about going, Basra, Teman, Dedan, places in Arabia, where he's going to come back with his garment covered in like he been treading in the wine fat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why, because of this type of stuff. So, and with that, we are going to end this video. And despite the heaviness of this video, I still give all praise, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahuwah Bahashem, Yahushua HaMashiach, and to the 12 tribes of Israel who are scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say Shalom or Baruchim. That is peace and blessings. And I really wish my people peace in that area. And man, I really, man, my heart goes out to my people over there, the people who are subject to those situations, living and deceased. To the 12 tribes who are scattered to the four quarters of the earth, I say peace and blessings. Shalom Wabarukim. And I cannot wait to the day that the Most High brings us back together, renders his recompense on our enemies, and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation, under the Most High power, under one covenant. Until that day, Shabbat Shalom, family.
Shabbat shalom, Mr. Paka.
Praise you, Abba Yah.